A big part of what has brought me to permaculture is that it's about following your passions. It's about moving towards what we would rather see in the world. It's not so much a paradigm of being against anything. We're having a lot of interaction with technological interfaces and not enough physical interaction with plants and soil and each other. How can we reconnect? How do you exert the least amount of effort to get the greatest amount of change? Put a sign at the top of the cliff that says, "Don't go over here," rather than having ambulances at the bottom of the cliff to make a lot of money off of people being sick and dying from things that we could have prevented by just putting a sign that says, "Don't do this." Because what we're doing with permaculture isn't so much saving the planet as much as it is saving ourselves. Permaculture is a design process that really at its core are its values, which are an ethical set of axioms, which are take care of the earth, take care of the people, and redistribute surplus. Permaculture. Lots of syllables, really vague. What do you mean? People say, what is that word permaculture? Definitions, terms that people associate with it. Permanent agriculture. Permanent culture. Lifestyle. Ecological design. Innovative solutions. Sustainable living. Polyculture. Disruptive technologies. Regenerative. Architecture, agriculture, and forestry. Historical. Consciousness. A good life. Social, political ascension. Integrity at all levels. I'm going to synopsize that as local meets global. Cosmic, kind of encapsulating them all, right? The way I like to define permaculture, my own definition of it, that's a recent agglomeration of some of these ideas that you all put out there. I like to characterize what we're doing and what I'm training you in as retrofitting the infrastructure to be more regionally self-reliant in ways that are ecologically well-informed, socially participated in, community is part of the design, and make economic sense using a form of economic measuring sticks that take into account all kinds of externalities. The first thing I like to point people towards who are wanting to understand how can I do permaculture when I'm in the middle of a giant, crazy, complex city landscape, the first thing to do is to really start to slow down in your own body chemistry. How can you begin to tune in more to what is going on in your apartment, in your landscape? And part of that is to first really notice simple things like, where does the sun rise and set? Are you tuned into that in your space? Have you started to get a sense of where are the places that you can sit and be quiet and observe the way in which the moon and the sun both move across your environment? And oftentimes we aren't really paying attention to the things that actually will help us to begin to get grounded in terms of what really matters to you. And first, before you start worrying about a lot of details of things to memorize or things to try and do right in order to be more eco-ideal, as I often say, people have this kind of notion of how do I become eco-perfect or how do I shrink my footprint. And I often like to point out that what we're teaching people how to do and what we're consulting in is not an ascetic deprivation, less bad, shrink your footprint kind of methodology. It's actually about celebrating that you're on a planet in outer space rocketing around the sun that has been evolving very successfully for 4.5 billion years. And the first thing we need to do is often sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride, is how I like to put it. Because people are so often worked up, especially in the urban environment, especially in New York City. There's a lot of sense of busyness and needing to be doing something. And that's what gets in the way very often of our health. And so when we want to claim our health, the first thing we need to do is really claim our own attention, claim our own awareness, and bring that into focus, into our own
space and recognize that no matter where you are on the planet, it is a sacred opportunity to be alive, and tuning into that gift really of the moment by simple awarenesses like where are places that I can sit early in the morning with no stimulation, focusing on my breath, staying in what the Buddhists call the theta state, which is what your brain chemistry is doing when you're asleep, and making sure. I always encourage our students in our design courses to practice this when they're studying with us, that in the morning they attempt to stay kind of nonverbal and relaxed and slowed down and drink a warm cup of tea or a cup of coffee or warm water and just sit and breathe and notice where the sun is rising, and get your really body's messages to be something that you can start to read and pay attention to. And then you'll start to know a lot more about what are the things that you can do to really further increase your health, which the next step is beyond introspection and meditation and beginning to tune into the daily rhythms of the sun across your property, which may sound, or your apartment or your rooftop, which may sound kind of esoteric, but it's really natural circadian rhythms that I'm encouraging you to tune into by doing that, right? So by saying, do this first, that's because your serotonin levels, your melatonin levels, your entire endocrine system responds to sunlight and is something that will get off balance if you aren't paying attention to turning off artificial lighting and being more in tune with natural lighting and really having your life be something that starts to make sense in terms of circadian rhythms. Then things like diet and what types of soap we're using and what types of filters you have on your shower all become also equally important places to put our attention to improve our quality of life. If we're living in a high-rise in Manhattan or in a brownstone in Park Slope, you want to be thinking about your shower water is one of your biggest endocrine disruptors because of the hot water opening up your skin pores to the chlorine gas that's coming out of the municipal water supply. And chlorine is a known powerful carcinogen. Mm-hmm. And when you're most vulnerable to it is when your skin is warm and your pores, people will call the surface of our skin the single largest organ in your body.
So what can somebody do then regarding the shower?
So we recommend different types of filters that are 12-stage filters, carbon filters that will last for 12 months, 18 months.
Water filters?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And so there are types that are just a little disc that basically you just take off the shower head, screw in this little disc, screw the shower head back on. Mm-hmm. And we also recommend that for drinking water, because water is 60% of our body. We should easily be drinking 1.5 gallons or so a day, depending on your body weight. And that water, you don't want to have it being full of fluoride or in effect what chlorine is, which is a biocide. And we often forget that municipal water supplies think that somehow it's okay to dump all these very caustic chemicals into our water supplies. And it's a huge exposure event that's very often not paid attention to. And it's one of the starting points for us in home consultation is looking at, first, how is your body energy getting tuned in? Next, what's your water supply like and how do we improve that? Mm-hmm. And then next is how to clean up your air with more houseplants. NASA actually did a study called How to Grow Clean Air, where they found that if you put 3 houseplants for about every 5 cubic feet of space, you will clean up all of the volatile organic compounds that are in the building. What's interesting is they thought that at first, but the studies have shown that actually it doesn't matter as long as there are 3 different types of plants. So it can be Dracania, it can be Boston fern, it can be mother-in-law's tongue, it can be any of these ornamentals as long as it's 3 of them that are different. Mm-hmm. And what's actually doing the air cleaning is fascinating when you look at the science behind this. What's actually doing the air cleaning is the the microbes that live at the root zone of the plants in the soil. It's not actually the plants. And the other fascinating piece of it is that it gets into a bunch of interesting things behind why I'm passionate about teaching permaculture in cities in particular, which a lot of people who teach permaculture don't really focus on the urban landscape. They're really focused largely on rural farming and what would be called broadacre application and not so much, in fact, oftentimes even being of the position that cities are just destined to collapse and why bother.
Oh.
And so I'm one of those few eggs in the permaculture community who said, actually, I think that it makes a lot of sense for us as ecological thinkers to look at what we can come up with to make cities a better place for people to live. And part of my sort of statistical reasoning behind that is over 50% of the world's population lives in cities today. And so arguably, if mainly you teach permaculture about rural applications, you're actually excluding 50% of the world's population from what you're teaching being relevant at all. And people who live in cities tend to spend 90% of their time indoors. And the EPA estimates that one of the top 5 causes of illness, for instance, is indoor air quality, or as I like to say, lack thereof. Take your pick of what a modern building is made out of, and pretty much all of it is off-gassing some type of synthetic chemical that's hazardous to your health.
Which just adds to the body burden.
Exactly. So
Okay.
the National Institute of Health estimates your average American has 52 different synthetic chemicals coursing through their bloodstream. And then, of course, the EPA doesn't acknowledge what the National Academy of Sciences talks about, which is multiple exposure synergy,
Yeah.
which I always say is a fun term to pull out at your cocktail parties with your friends. You know, they're like, oh yeah, multiple exposure synergy. And we're like, what is that? And you're like, this is a fun one. It's when you are exposed to a carcinogen and an endocrine disruptor at the same time, you're 10 times more likely to contract a carcinoma from that carcinogen. So if you're getting into a vehicle that's off-gassing formaldehyde fumes, or putting on your Finesse hair conditioner, which has formaldehyde in it, and then breathing in your chlorinated water as you're taking your shower, you've now got an endocrine disruptor interacting with a carcinogen. And the whole panoply of these cocktails is far more problematic than any one of them are, separately or individually.
Well, the whole idea of synergies and interconnectedness, I mean, clearly can be dysfunctional, but
Right.
also as a layperson, this is my understanding of permaculture, is that it says, well, but we could also connect things that are very positive. And what I've heard you
Exactly,
say
yeah.
is this, the stimuli seems to be the connecting theme. You know, watch the stimuli, get off your mobile device and actually look at the sun. You know, what kind of water do you have? What kind of air? How about food? How does this, what should I do? Instruct me regarding food.
Well, in regards to food, food is really what we jokingly call the gateway drug, because food is the one that's really waking up our culture, our society, our economy to a lot of opportunities and awarenesses about what has been lacking in the corporate-dominated food supply, which has been nutritional value and vitality and social integrity. All of those things are non-existent in the agribusiness sector of food, which is what people seem to consider food. And I jokingly say we should probably call it toxic waste, because it's actually not fit for human consumption. But it is what the vast majority of Americans consider to be their right, is to have cheap food that's really supplied through a lot of unethical and entirely unhealthy methodologies. But that
Wrapped
has
in
been
plastic.
Exactly.
Every individual apple wrapped in plastic.
So, so food is the gateway, in that it's the opening into how do we redesign our civilization. As we started talking out, it's really where permaculture has developed a lot of thinking and has a lot of groundwork of how do we do a much better job than chemical industrial agriculture ever can do. And the curious thing about the mythology that a lot of G20 nations and Americans in particular seem to have bought into about industrial agriculture is that it grows more food, which, according to the United Nations, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, is not true. So all of their latest studies, the International Symposium that the FAO just had in Rome, their president of that organization is saying the key to international food security is really agroecology, which is a complex hyphenated word that most people, again, who don't study these things, just find confusing.
So break it down really
Well,
easily.
so
for
what it
us.
really means, what they're saying is that small diversified family farms that incorporate a number of different crops like nut trees and date palms and livestock and vegetables produce far more yields per acre than any monoculture industrial farm ever can. And they are outspokenly advocates and creating incentives and supporting small diversified local farms, and specifically say the industrial system is a failure. We can't tweak it, we can't modify it, i.e. no place for GMOs in international food security. They are literally saying this in their latest documents they're putting out. They're saying the industrial system's failed. The answer to international food security is diversified small-scale farms. Nothing's ever done a better job of feeding the world's people than they have.
But then when you get the corporate-controlled industrial food base and all of the cash behind it, and then you have, local farmers somehow competing against that, that's
Yeah.
not easy. So
Not
what
easy is an understatement,
yeah.
right? So the World Bank and the IMF fund purposefully undercut those markets and then have destroyed local agriculture.
And many in the U.S. government worked for Monsanto,
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, for example. So what would you see as a way to actually implement this, to empower these smaller farmers to rise?
Well, in many ways, it is already happening around what we might call the foodie movement or organic food. That's a sector of our economy that pretty much didn't exist in the early 80s. So I think that you'll find that oftentimes people often focus on the negative, and it's just as available for us to focus on the positive when it comes to food and all kinds of things. In that sense, that's that Aikido approach that permaculture has of saying, let's look at the problem, and in the midst of that, we'll see the solution for it.
So as a consumer, what I can do is choose to buy organic, and that's another how-to thing that I can do.
That's a first tier of it. I mean, it's an interesting conversation. There are many people who I work with who will say, well, I would buy local over organic. And my argument is actually, I would buy organic over local if I can't be sure that local is organic.
Oh, okay.
Because to me, it's more important that you or I, as the person who's actually eating the food, don't have a health problem because we did what we felt was ethical. And to me, that's the contradiction in putting local over organic, if it can't be 100% confirmed that that local is beyond organic, right? So if it's local and beyond organic, that's great. If it's just local and not organic, I'm going to buy organic from California, even though it's unethical, even though it may be exploiting people, because ultimately, am I going to die prematurely from cancer because I did the right thing by eating a local piece of cabbage that was coated in pesticides? That makes no, to me, sense as far as our choices. And that's the kind of debate that you'll find happening in the local food movement. I know many people who hang their hat on, oh, no, I would never do that. I would always buy local.
I think most people in the public just don't even think in those terms. It's like, okay, it's cheap, it's in plastic, I can buy, 3 for the price of 2, I'll take it,
Yeah.
So let's say I want to incorporate some of your principles, and I have this little tiny garden in the back. What can I do with a small space that is both healthful but also in alignment with permaculture?
Sure. Well, the first thing is to think about what you want to do and come up with your goals. What are your desires? Would you like to watch a hummingbird come up to feed off of some beans that you've planted? Would you like to enjoy smelling lavender? Do you want to have some mint to put into your mojito that you're having for a cocktail party? What are you trying to do? We've designed gardens for clients who wanted to be garnished, self-sufficient for mojito parties and a rooftop balcony. And that's absolutely practicing permaculture. As I often say, we'll know we're there when I'm having to turn down being invited to wood-fired hot tub parties in greenhouses, drinking kiwi wine, eating sourdough bread and heirloom tomatoes with aioli from our pastured chickens. Because it's really about, I often say it's where the party is. It's not something that's less bad. It's really about celebrating what is real food, what's real drink, what's real company. What's the real celebration that's available here to be participating in on this planet, should we choose to be producing more of what it is that we consume rather than simply being consumers? So a big part of what we're leaning towards is training up people to grow these super high quality, super nutritional foods, as well as energy systems, home systems, and really scaling it up into a whole new set of engineering, contractors, green career jobs. So where we're looking at it is food is the first one that needs our attention as designers, because right now there's market demand that's outstripping supply, and there's a huge amount of growth in it. Organic is growing by 7%. Local food is estimated to sell about 180 million a year in the Hudson Valley, but the demand is estimated to be well over 800 million. So you're looking at over $700 million of buying power right now that ends up being spent on products from Washington State, from Italy, from New Zealand, instead of buying products that could undercut those international producers easily because of the fact that they wouldn't have to travel such a long distance. And for a lot of the buying base that wants those products, they'll actually pay a percentage more because it was locally produced and organic. So what we're looking at is that actually there's a huge demand right now in the Northeast in particular that's rapidly outstripping supply. And the opportunity is now, and it's not an opportunity that existed in the 1980s. And things really are changing when you look at the demand for ecological, ethical, healthy, better alternatives in all kinds of sectors. I was just keynote speaker at the FIT Sustainability Conference, so we've even got Fashion Institute of Technology and sustainable textiles, and students studying how do we make a closed loop textile business that uses Japanese knotweed or kudzu to make shirts out of or packaging out of. So really a piece of what we're starting with is food, but then we're looking at how do we scale up solving agricultural self-sufficiency and at the same time transportation and energy and materials.
So we've gone from a whole range of synergies. First of all, to be more present in yourself, to understand the water and the air in your apartment and in your environment, the food that you eat. And then that obviously can extend outwards to our very economy. I'd like to play devil's advocate just for a second.
Sure.
We also have other forces. Let's take something like nuclear weapons or the nuclear power industry, nuclear weapons that have a lot of money. And how on earth can we keep this kind of lifestyle and somehow engage actively against that kind of force?
Well, I see those things as a beneficial dynamic in the sense that that lifestyle and the way of living that we've been talking about is actually essential to keep our energy and our fortitude up in order to be able to vigilantly resist the things that also have to be resisted right now, like really bad ideas like nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants, and at the same time creating the better alternative. So that it's the both and approach is how we take it in permaculture. We're saying you both need to live healthier, and that doesn't mean a purgative health. That means really good fats, good food, lots of fermented foods that come from really vital and nutritious local plants. And at the same time, that's going to enable you to resist a lot of the mega issues that are happening at a global level and at a local level. And we need to be involved in creating the alternatives, because we can kvetch forever about all the problems in the world, but are we actually doing something to make something available to people that isn't repeating those problems? And that's part of what permaculture challenges us to do, and in effect opens that opportunity and says, design a better world, and design it on a place-by-place basis. Start with your own life, start with your own home, start with your own community, start with your own diet. And through that, you have a ripple effect that's going to change the entire world. But if you don't start at home, you actually won't really be effective at changing global problems either.
Well, and on that very positive note, we thank you very much for having joined us, Andrew Faust. And we thank you for joining us as well.